I'm Andy Mueller with the Colorado River District, southwestern sister district to the north here on the west slope. The question that Steve posed to our panel is, what are the solutions for the next 20 years? And I'll be the first to admit that we often get bogged down in what are the current problems, right? So how do we talk about where we go from here? And I think that the first thing I would say, and I think Chuck alluded to this, is that, look, the river is governed by a very complex series of agreements and court decrees. It's collectively called the law of the river. The one that I think has driven us into the current crisis right now are the 2007 operating guidelines that coordinate the operations of Powell and Meade, right? And they don't stand alone. They stand within the context of the law of the river. Within the fundamental bedrock of that law of the river is the compact signed in 1922. There are a whole lot of different interpretations of that compact. That's actually why Chairman Hart just talked about in an effort to come up with a collaborative solution, there were 6 states who came up with one solution and California who came up with another. Both parties, the 6 states and the state of California, believe that their solutions are consistent with the law of the river. That's, it's hard to understand, but the compact that governs this is 3 pages long. And in order to be that short and cover such important issues as water allocation, there had to be an awful lot of generalities and ambiguities contained within the document to make sure that we could get everybody to agree back in 101 years ago. So how do we focus on the future and understand where we are and how we get out of this real quagmire we're in? I would say this, that the first thing we have to do is recognize that the water supply is changed underneath our feet. Yes, this year is a really good year, and we appreciate that for all the reasons and all the different benefits it's going to bring. It will probably also bring some additional pretty severe flooding to portions of this area and our area up north. California, I think, is already experiencing significant flooding and probably will see a whole lot more as that record snowpack melts off. But the good things are positive, but I think what we have to remember, and it's sometimes hard, is that one good year just means that the weather was good. It doesn't mean that the climate is going back to what we experienced in the 1970s or before. We have to understand that we have to pay attention to the science. We have to understand that our future is going to be a future with less water. And if we have to live with less water, we can either choose to dig down and fight it out from our foxholes throughout the basin, or we can try to collaborate. And I think that it's important that we all approach it from a collaborative perspective. That being said, we have interests in western Colorado that we have to protect, and just as the other regions of the river need to protect theirs. So we need to understand BART in California's interests. We need to understand the interests that exist in Arizona and in Nevada. But we also need them to understand our interests and respect our interests. And so I want to just look at a couple solutions. One, the way this system has been managed under the 07 guidelines and the current operational procedures by the Bureau of Reclamation in the 7 states has been a failure. It is a failure of governance. It is a governance system that has kept us in the last 5 years in a system of a series of continual crises. We are not doing what we need to do in the water management community by truly planning for our future in the long run, because as we say at my organization, similar to Southwest, is our job is to help water users understand what's coming for the next 10, 20, 30, even 50 years and be able to plan and adapt for it. The way the current guidelines have affected the river, the entire federal governance structure and the states have been focused on absolute crisis management. Immediate needs have to be met. How do you deal with a crisis? Well, I think that we can't continue to do that if we're going to get out of this, this problem and if we're actually going to find collaborative solutions. What do I mean by that? I think that we have to find a system, and it's the guidelines that were signed in '07 or became effective in '07 are to be replaced and terminated in 2026. So the 7 states are meeting constantly they're supposed to be focused on that. They've been focused only on this immediate crisis management. So how do we change that perspective and start looking at the long term? And the first thing in that situation is that what we need everybody on the river to understand that they have to live within the hydrology that the river actually offers, right? In the upper basin, you've heard from both Chuck and the chairman that we live within that hydrology, right? We adapt as the snowpack comes and goes. This year, we're going to get to refill our reservoirs. The chairman and the tribe are going to have 100% allocation. 2 years ago, they had 10%, right? And if you go back to 2 years ago, 2021, the upper basin reduced its consumptive uses by over 1 million acre-feet. That same year, the lower basin that sits below the 2 major reservoirs in the system increased their uses by 600,000 acre-feet, right? That's not living within the hydrology. That's a problem, right? How do we get guidelines in place that actually make all of us in this river system live within that hydrology? I can tell you that Southwestern and the River District are working with our state to come up with different governance structures, to produce different modeling that will help inform the policy decision makers in those negotiations. I think it's critically important. I think that what that means is we need to tighten the valves at the end of the system. They've been wide open for the last 23 years. Hoover Dam is a big drain hole that has been taking the water that comes from the upper basin. And arguably, that's how the guidelines exist. That's what we agreed to in 2007. I would say it's not what we agreed to in 1922 because the upper basin has been taking far more than their 7.5 million acre-foot allotment. And that's because the Bureau of Reclamation has been operating those reservoirs in such a way that the lower basin doesn't get charged with system losses. Evaporative loss and transit loss are the major issue here. That's by the lower basin's own calculations, Southern Nevada Water Authority, 1.5 million acre-feet a year are lost in that system to evaporation and transit loss. Just to put it in context, our biggest reservoir in our state is Blue Mesa, and it holds slightly over 800,000 acre-feet of water. So double that is what is lost to evaporation and transit loss, and the lower basin doesn't account for that. But that is absolutely their consumptive use because it comes out of a system that is designed to enable their beneficial consumptive uses. Without Lake Mead, without those deliveries down the river, without Lake Havasu, without Mojave, they would not have their other beneficial uses. Evaporation is part and parcel to their uses in the lower basin. It is part of their obligation and our rights to enforce under the compact. The guidelines need to be adjusted for that. Bottom line is, in a system, if you're going to manage it well like this, evaporation as you go lower in elevation is more. It's hotter, the atmospheric pressure is different, there is a greater evaporation from surface areas of both lakes and rivers. So what would you do if you could manage the system well? You would keep that water higher in the system because water higher in the system allows the operators of the system to have more options and preserve more water when needed, right? I'm not saying don't provide the lower basin their entitlement. I'm saying let's keep the water up in the system so that we can manage it in the best way possible. That would be a really helpful thing in the next round of guidelines. Now let's be honest here though. We've all got to come to terms with this hydrologic reality. In Colorado and in the rest of the upper basin, as well as in the lower basin, I think what we're looking at is a massive sea change, right? We in the upper basin, as well as folks in the lower basin, have always been looking at this river as, and when I say this river, I mean all of the tributaries to the Colorado, as an endless source, right? And we have all these plans for additional development of water rights. And I don't think that's wrong, but I want to propose that we are no longer in hydrology that allows for new development. What we're talking about when we're talking about new development today is reallocation of the existing water uses, right? So reallocation is a scary word to folks like us on the Western Slope who have senior agricultural water rights and small populations and little political control in the system, right? So, but that's really where we are in today's world. It's not a world of big dreams where we get to build big reservoirs and big systems because the water that's in the system has already been allocated and claimed. So reallocation creates conflict. If not handled well, it can literally break out into war in the courts. We could break out into worse kind of conflicts. So we need to look at this and we need to understand where we're headed, right? I think Chuck talked about the System Conservation Pilot Program that rolled out this year or in December from the UCRC along with $125 million from the federal government. That's a reallocation of water from our agriculture on the western slope of Colorado to the lower basin, plain and simple. If we're gonna engage in reallocation, let's understand what it is, and then let's design a program that actually protects our interests in that reallocation. Let's do it and do it intelligently. Let's create rules that protect our water users from injury. Let's do it in a way that protects our communities in their longevity. There are ways to do that. The way the System Conservation Pilot Program rolled out is not the way to do it. We need our communities, if you remember, many of you in this audience, and I know us and others in this state, were engaged in a whole long dialogue about water markets, about the reallocation of water. In that instance, we called it demand management. Lots of discussion about proportionality, protection of communities, protection of injury. None of that was addressed in the System Conservation Pilot Program. We collectively have to do way better than that. Our state has pledged to do better, and I appreciate that pledge from the state. We will be involved, and we need all of you to be involved because they're talking about your water and my district's water when we're talking about those water markets. And that's the lifeblood of our communities, and it's really important. One last thing I want to touch on is just the tribal water rights. Chairman did an excellent job talking about it. 25 to 30% of the water in the Colorado River is decreed, it's either decreed or actually guaranteed by treaty to the tribes. There are over 30 sovereign nations within the Colorado River system. They have a tremendous amount of water that they, for various reasons, economic, prejudice, historic mistreatment, have not been able to develop, right? There are water users in our system, traditional Anglo water users, who view that as a threat. I would say I view that as an opportunity, right? We have a whole segment of our community who share our values. They are farmers and ranchers. Let's look right now. Chairman, you talked about 77,000 acres of irrigated agriculture on the Mountain Ute tribe lands. The Ute Mountain Utes and the Southern Utes are the two largest agricultural producers and largest holder of ag rights in western Colorado. They share our values and our concerns, and we've got to do better working with those tribes to make sure that they have the water they need. We can do that in a way that's not injurious to our other water users in the system. We can do that in a way that is collaborative. In the overall basin, there are needs that tribes have that have not been met. How do we help meet those tribal needs while at the same time utilizing their willingness to participate in solutions to bring those solutions to the table? We do that by dialogue, we do that by communications, we do that by understanding each other, and I just want to thank the chairman for inviting all of us to come out and see some of those operations and understand them. I think that's how we move forward. Just as I said before, the states need to understand their interests. We also need to understand and find those solutions. 25 to 30% of the water in the system has to be a major part of the solution. My time's limited now, but we really want to get everybody's comments and questions today, so thank you very much.